Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Candidate Forum for U.S. Congress District 1. The forum will begin in just a few seconds. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters in conjunction with the Links Incorporated. Audience in Zoom, please note that your microphones and video cameras have been muted to improve bandwidth, but we do want you to ask questions. So if you're watching in Zoom, please tap the Q&A button and enter your question. If you're watching on Facebook Live, please enter a comment or a post. And I'll moderate both to make sure that your question gets asked, as long as we don't run out of time. To access those video recordings, if you go back to where you registered for this forum, you'll see buttons to both Facebook and YouTube. Tomorrow, we will post a video of the forum in YouTube as well, but it will always be on Facebook for you to watch. Candidates will have 2 minutes to give an opening statement, 1.5 minutes to respond to questions, 30 seconds for a rebuttal, so candidates don't forget to signal if you want to rebut, but you get 1 rebuttal per question. Then they'll have 1 minute for closing statements. We have timekeepers, Holly and Al Picardi, and they will give a 30-second warning for opening statements and question responses, and a final warning for statements, responses, and rebuttal. Let me just tell you a little bit about our first moderator, Dr. Cheryl Howard. She is a member of both the League of Women Voters and the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated is an international not-for-profit organization founded in 1946. It's one of the nation's oldest and largest African-American women service organizations in the world, with more than 16,000 members in 288 chapters located in 41 states, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and the United Kingdom. The Links is committed to enriching, sustaining, and ensuring the culture and economic survival of African American and other persons of African ancestry. Their core values are friendship, integrity, honesty, service, commitment, family relationships, courage, respect for self and others, legacy, confidentiality, responsibility, and accountability. This organization of extraordinary African-American women is devoted to service that strengthens African-American communities by providing outstanding programs and services within 5 program facets, which include services to youth, the arts, national trends and services, international trends and services, and health and human services. Links members donate millions of documented service hours in their respective communities collectively, annually. The philanthropic arm, the Links Foundation, has provided charitable contributions of more than $24 million to local, regional, national, and internationally identified needs, such as its $1 million donation to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital to expand its research of sickle cell disease. The Pensacola chapter of the Links Incorporated was founded in 1972 and serves Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, and Walton counties. In partnership with sponsors and supporters, the Pensacola chapter of the Links has a long tradition of engaging in educational, civic, and intercultural activities within the communities they serve, and at the forefront are legislative issues, public affairs, and disaster relief. Their membership consists of accomplished women who are influential decision makers and distinguished local leaders who have made and continue to make a difference in their communities and the world. I'm sorry, I have the wrong name on this slide. Our moderator for tonight is not Dr. Paula Montgomery, but Dr. Sally Brown, but she's representing the League of Women Voters nonetheless. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 with its goal to help women to register to vote. In 1920, some women earned the right to vote through the 19th Amendment, but not all women. Women of color had to wait as late as 1965 and 1975 for Native American women. We're a nonpartisan organization, so we do not support or oppose any particular candidate. Our mission is to empower all voters to defend democracy. We have an important role in the community through voter service and citizen education. We study issues and then we decide what action to take. We'd like to remind you that vote411.org is a website sponsored by the League of Women Voters, where you can find information about candidates on your ballot, including judges, information on amendments, and referenda. So please log in to vote411.org if you need some help before you vote. So at this point, let me turn the forum over to our moderators, Dr. Sally Brown and Dr. Cheryl Howard. Thank you, moderators.
Thank you. We begin with opening statements from each candidate. I will start with Mr. Ayer, and then when you've completed your 2-minute opening statement, we will go to Mr. Oram. So, Mr. Ayer.
Ask him to unmute, please. Mr. Ayer, unmute.
Unmute. Are you did you unmute? Okay.
Thank you. To know what kind of congressman I'll be, I need to take you back to a day in 1989, the height of the Cold War and my service in the Navy. Imagine, we were a naval air crew flying alone over icy seas, unarmed and unafraid, into the teeth of the Soviet war machine. A pair of Soviet armed fighters intercepted, flashed their missiles, and ordered us to depart. Yet we stayed the course. The hostile fighters maneuvered aggressively, blasted their exhaust into our engines, tossing us around, risking collision and compromising our ability to maintain course and altitude. And that danger was real. Yet we remained on station to capture the signals that revealed what the Russians tried to hide. And that was just one in a long series of classified reconnaissance missions flown day after day and year upon year for decades to keep the Cold War from turning hot. Now, I learned a great deal in my naval service. First, vision is mission critical. We simply cannot fight an enemy we can't see, whether that enemy is North Korea's nuclear threat, COVID-19, or global warming. Signals we reported up the chain of command saved lives and made America stronger. We need leaders in Washington with their eyes open, prepared to act. Second, risk factors in everything worthwhile. Those who live financially privileged and risk-free lives find it difficult to understand the integrity and sacrifice required for a life of public service. We need leaders in Washington we trust to stand for what is right, even when it's not popular. Third, there's no substitute for people. We have the mightiest fighting force in the world because of the smart, ethical, and brave men and women who are out there every day keeping us safe. And that's why I'm in this race. As your reconnaissance officer, I recognize the grave danger in our course, and duty compels me to sound the alarm to change course with fresh, competent leadership in Washington. I'll work with the new president and the new speaker when they're right and stand up to them when they're wrong. So I'm humbly asking you to trust me to represent you as we together move Northwest Florida forward with honor.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer. Just right on time. Mr. Oram, it's your turn. Thank you.
Good evening, League of Women Voters, people out there. My name is Bert Oram, or Albert Oram. That's how you'll find me on the ballot. Make America more perfect. Don't vote hate. My father was in the Navy. I was in the Navy for 7+ years. I was a Navy spouse for 20+ years. I graduated from the Naval Academy. I went through flight training. I will dare to lead to build a consensus to make America more perfect. Now, you may hear other slogans, but They look to the past and not to the future. What do I mean by make America more perfect? Well, for the last 2 years, I have posted on my Facebook page on the 4th of July the following: this country is great, not because it was ever perfect, complete, or finished, but because it continually strives to be better. Even our founding fathers knew this. The Constitution starts with these words: we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure tranquility, secure the blessings of liberty, do ordain and establish this Constitution. If you believe this, like I do, anything is possible. But today it's very alarming. We have 13 men charged with a violent plot to storm the Michigan State Capitol and kidnap the governor. We have a president who tweets, "Liberate Michigan." This is, some say this is America now, but I don't agree. It is important to note this may be a bipartisan problem, but top Republican politicians are encouraging violence. Hate groups hear these words. It doesn't have to happen. Every good person must speak out. We must go to the polls, we must vote, and it must be an overwhelming victory for making America more perfect. And when you vote, don't vote hate.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes. Good evening. Since Mr. Oram, you've given your opening statement last, I will ask you the first question. In your view, what are the top 2 problems or issues facing the 1st District, and how are you going to address them? And please be specific.
Well, I have short-term goals, long-term goals, and never-ending goals. But let me talk about my short-term goals. I think first that we must address the COVID crisis, because 1,000 people a day die in the United States. And it's been inept leadership that has caused this problem. The death rate, adjusted for population in Canada, is 60% lower. In Japan, it's 90% lower. In New Zealand, it's 99% lower. I believe that we need an aggressive policy to addressing this issue. We need testing, isolation, tracing, and treatment. This is what President Trump gets when he gets the disease, and yet our leadership has ignored this issue for too long. I propose that we have 25 million tests per day. That would mean that everybody in the United States could get a test every 2 weeks. Now, why is this important? Because there are many small businesses in this district and throughout the nation that are going bankrupt because we have not addressed this issue. I consider it the most important issue facing us right now. There are other issues, as I've said. I think there needs to be liberty and justice for all. But right now, the most important thing is to stop as many deaths as possible and to correct this problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oram. Mr. Ayer, would you like for me to repeat the question? In your view, what are the top 2 problems or issues facing the 1st District, and how are you going to address them?
The immediate problem is the virus. It's changing all our lives and the economy. Those are the top 2 issues. And it's sadly overwhelmed the rest of us. 217,000 American lives lost. Tens of millions unemployed. And what we've got is Matt Gaetz not taking it seriously. He doesn't care about us in the way he is addressing or frankly ignoring the physical world. I've lived in the regular world. I've spent my career as a naval aviator. We take safety seriously. Aircraft and flying, as an analogy, is inherently risky. Going into a business, a restaurant, a grocery store, going to school, going out in the public right now is inherently risky. And we need to do it with safety in mind first. Go up and fly with safety, and in the Navy, if we don't take care of that, we crash and burn. We don't want people to crash and burn. We don't want to have our the capacity of our hospitals be the threshold for when we say, oh, it's okay for you all to suffer as long as we have bed space in the hospitals. That's wrong. Safety and the economy must work hand in hand. And that's why I'm in this race, to put real world practical solutions and empower the scientists and the public health professionals. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, would you like to have 30 seconds for rebuttal?
Well, I'd like to have more time, but very quickly, I agree with Mr. Ayer in that the president has said 138 times that the virus is not a problem. He's downplayed it. And after he's done so, what does Matt Gaetz say, who can't be here today? I will never love another president again. With so many people ignoring what the president is doing, or worse, cheering him on, nothing will ever get corrected. That's why Mr. Gaetz has to go.
Thank you. Mr. Ayer, I'm going to ask you the next question. What will you do to ensure that the citizens of District 1 feel that you are representing them with integrity?
Oh my goodness. Well, I will do my level best, as I have through an entire career of naval service, where you are promoted or kicked out on the basis of integrity and honor. It's fundamental to what we do. It's fundamental to what people in this district do. We have the largest military community of any congressional district in the nation, and that makes the honor code most pervasive within our district. But it doesn't just apply to military folks and their families. It applies to business people, to teachers, to Boy Scouts, to Girl Scouts, to everybody who is a reasonable person who attends church, synagogue, etc. Look, we've got to have leadership by example. And when I'm wrong, and I will be, because I'm not perfect, I need to be held accountable. And and that's what we're about doing now. Mr. Gaetz is dishonorable in the way he conducts his business. He is unserious about the representation we have in Congress, with his legislative record, with his rhetoric, and his lack of focus. Where is he on issues that matter right here in everybody's kitchen table to everyday Floridians? Where was he in the wake of Hurricane Sally? Yes, he made some appearances. Was it sufficient? No, it was not sufficient. Where is he on the infrastructure bill? Where is he on the beaches? My goodness. And where is he on economic issues that matter at the kitchen table? He is AWOL.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Oram. What will you do to ensure that the citizens of District 1 feel that you are representing them with integrity?
Well, I live by the golden rule, so that guides all of my judgment. I also, when I was 17, swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Mr. Ayer and I both served in the Navy, so we're familiar with the Navy Code, which is honor, courage, and commitment. And I will live by that code. In the Army, they call it duty, honor, country. But it's not surprising that the one person who's not here today never served in the military and is not here to answer questions. He makes a few appearances, maybe. I never saw him in the Pensacola area, but it's outrageous that he sits quietly while 1,000 people a day die. He has no shame or decency. He pledges undying love to the president, while the president defames a woman who was a devoted wife and a good Christian. I'm talking about Lori Klaus-Sutis, who lives in Niceville. Her family is not only a constituent of Mr. Gaetz, they're his neighbors. And yet when the president had the dishonor of criticizing her and defaming her character, where was Gaetz to defend her and tell the president, enough is enough, Mr. President? He's incapable of doing it. I'm capable of doing it. I'm determined and a bit stubborn.
Stop. Thank you, Mr. Oram. I'm going to turn the questioning over now to my co-moderator, Dr. Sally Brown.
Okay, here's one a little more specific. Most scientists attribute several recent events to the warming of our planet. I'm talking about things like increasing numbers of fires, decline in Arctic ice, and affecting us in Florida, especially tropical cyclones and rising seas. What should the U.S. Congress do in this regard? What can it do? Should the U.S. stand aside, or should we contribute to the international discussion about climate change? This question goes first, I've forgotten where we are, to Mr.
I
Ayer.
believe I'm next.
Yeah, okay, all right, I'm sorry, to Mr. Oram.
Well, I can answer that question with a question of my own. Do you love your children? Because many of us here, Mr. Ayer, myself, ladies, with all due respect, we don't have that as many years left as our children and our grandchildren do. But they are the ones that are going to live with our refusal to address this issue. Now, is the planet warming? I don't know, but I do know science is unequivocal that we keep pumping more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Every month you hear of another record set, the warmest month, the warmest year. We keep seeing more and more violent tornadoes and other weather events. I don't think that we can ignore the problem, that we can ignore the fact that we're putting all this carbon dioxide into the air. I support a program that would, and we're going to spend money trying to get people back to boost the economy and get people back to work. Well, let's focus it on some areas that will have a long-term benefit to us. We have to do it for our children and our grandchildren, or we will have to explain why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ayer, would you like me to repeat the question?
For the audience, yes. And for me too.
Okay. Most scientists attribute the warming to the warming of our planet, things like increased numbers of forest fires, Arctic ice, and tropical cyclones and rising seas. What can and should the United States Congress do in this regard? Should the United States continue to stand aside as we are doing now, or should we contribute to the international discussion about climate change?
Okay, you asked many different things. And the reason I asked you to repeat it was your focus is on the Congress and the government and the people at large. So let me tackle all of those. And first to say that in the executive branch, when I had the privilege to serve in the Navy, many of my tours were focused on the physical world at sea. And I was a military strategist in which global warming featured in threat assessments and long-term planning. And the long-term planning is missing in the current federal government's budget planning and in the way they manage the agencies of NOAA, of the EPA, and others. While Matt Gaetz is, wants to get rid of the EPA. Oh my gosh, let's get real. And getting real means that we need to have Congress step up to its role, assert itself a lot more on a whole range of issues, and climate is one of them. Congress should support the next president in re-engaging American leadership in global warming discussions. That means rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. We need to thank you. We need to make sure that fuels, as in Congress, I want to reduce the subsidies for fossil fuel corporations so that by 2050 we have net neutral on the carbon emissions. And we need to focus locally. What's going on with that international paper plan? Well, there's a lot of issues there. And what I want to do in Congress is update the Federal Clean Air Act and the Federal Clean Water Act and hold those acts to science's accountability.
Mr. Oram, would you like to rebut?
Yes, I just want to say briefly, we agree that something needs to be done. I'm in favor of using market mechanisms in order to encourage the reduction of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Again, we must do this for our children and our grandchildren, or they will not have fond memories of us.
True.
My next question is a follow-up, really, on that question. And it goes to Mr. Oram.
No, Mr. Air this time, I believe.
Jeez, I'm really, I need a lot of help. Thank you.
Not at all.
This question is about the bipartisan Market Choice Act, which is sitting in Congress now. It would abolish the federal gas tax and instead establish a tax on greenhouse gas emissions, what's usually called a carbon tax. 70% of this tax would fund infrastructure spending, especially the Highway Trust Fund. What is your position on the Market Choice Act? How would you vote and why? Mr. Ayer.
Okay, thank you. You also brought in the infrastructure bill, as did Mr. Oram earlier. The infrastructure bill would be funded by the taxes that you have outlined or referred to in this bill. The federal infrastructure bill should have been the first order of business in the 2017 Congress when Matt Gaetz first came into office. And it was legislative malpractice to not tackle that first. It was bipartisan in nature, would have propelled the government into a good start instead of the dysfunctional and separating part that we see now. So I want to make sure that we've got a handle on control and using market forces and the taxing incentives and taxing laws that the federal government has right and ought to do for the common good to reduce the carbon emissions and to play our part in reducing the gases and reducing the effects of global warming. We need to make sure that that is not burdensome, but we also need to move expeditiously without being burdensome, and that's where the infrastructure bill comes in, and jobs, creating good jobs comes in. It's a critical piece of this, and the workforce development is a critical piece of this, and workers' interests at the table of these negotiations is absolutely crucial, but to move us to carbon neutral by 2050.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, would you like me to repeat the question?
Well, you said the Market Choice Act, was that correct?
Yes.
All right, I'm not familiar with that piece of legislation. You did mention that it would replace the gas tax. First, my concern would be that the gas tax is used to fund highways, which are important to commerce. So I would not be in favor of that. But how are we going to fund it? We're going to spend money anyways. We just spent $3 trillion. What did we get? We gave everybody $1,200, and we gave billionaires like Trump another tax break. A $1 trillion tax break can be found in the CARES Act for wealthy millionaires and billionaires. I think we can spend the money better. Again, we can focus on our future. We're not looking back, we're looking forward. I would propose we're going to spend more money. We're going to boost the economy to get people back to work. Economists believe that this is a good idea, although in the long term, we need to get deficit spending under control. In the short term, interest rates are so low. Let's borrow another $1 trillion from China. They want to give it to us, and let's spend it for something good. Let's focus on reducing greenhouse gases. This isn't hard, ladies and gentlemen. It just takes determination and a backbone to speak out. And I'm going to tell you, I can do it.
Mr. Ayer, would you like to rebut at all? No. Thank you. Cheryl.
Okay. I'm going to start this time with you, Mr. Oram. Do you have any concerns about the expansion of offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico? And if so, what are your concerns?
Well, my primary concern would be that it not interfere with military operations. We have some areas of operation off the coast. And as we've discussed in a number of questions, is our future with fossil fuel or not? I believe we need to move away from fossil fuel. They've said, the experts have, that if we focused on natural gas and then move to nuclear, we could substantially reduce greenhouse gases quickly. And also there are other renewables, solar power, wind. So I don't think our future lies in drilling off the coast. So why start doing it now? I would be opposed if it would interfere with military operations. Of course, we'd want it far enough off the coast not to mar our view. That's a favorite excuse of Trump when he opposes these near his own properties. So what's good for him is good for the rest of us. Let's find a different way to find energy independence. I'm not opposed to drilling for oil because we use it, but I don't think our future is there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ayer, do you need for me to repeat the question?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you. So I want to agree that the military training range is a gem and a critical piece of keeping America strong. Someone who's looked to the future of warfare and looked to the kinds of capabilities we need. We also need the sea space and airspace and underwater space to be able to conduct training. And the entire Florida delegation, as far as I understand, has been against offshore drilling offshore of Florida. And the president's signature on a piece of paper that says there's going to extend the moratorium on the drilling in the eastern area of the training range is insufficient. And Matt Gaetz's response is insufficient. It needs to be permanent, it needs to be in law, and it needs to be beyond the shores of Florida. My goodness, let's think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Where was the BP oil spill rig that destroyed Pensacola Beach, Perdido Key? Where was that? Well, that was offshore Louisiana. Now, I'm not saying we need to shut down everything, but at least we need to put in place the safety precautions that would prevent the next one. And Matt Gaetz is just fine with the Obama era safety valve regulation being stripped away from the rule book when the Trump administration came in. So what he's not doing, Matt Gaetz is not doing, is taking a look at offshore oil drilling and the ecosystem that it impacts. And all he's looking at is short-term fixes that is insufficient.
Thank you. The next question is for you again, Mr. Ayer.
May I respond?
Oh, would you like, I'm sorry, I missed your signal to rebut. Yes, go right.
Yes, just quickly. Good point, Bill. I'd forgotten about the oil spill. I'm not sure how. It's one of the many failures of our federal government not properly regulating. But why does Trump keep changing his mind? Well, I understand Trump. Trump is an immoral, dishonorable, narcissistic con man. And when he thinks it's going to get him votes, he says drill offshore. And when he's going to lose votes, he says don't drill offshore. If he gets reelected, I'm the guy that can handle him because I understand Trump better than I think the other candidates do.
Thank you, Mr. Oram. Okay, Mr. Ayer, should FEMA continue to pay for rebuilding in flood-prone areas?
Yes, FEMA should be around to help us with the effects of hurricanes. Now, that wasn't the question you asked. You get flood-prone areas. Well, there are more and more areas that are flood-prone these days. And what we haven't done is what we need to do, and that is budget for it, respond to it faster, and make sure that people have the assurance that there's proper planning on Santa Rosa Island, on shore everywhere in the Panhandle, so that when these hurricanes come, we have already built the infrastructure needed to mitigate the damage, that we have the funds around and the pulse on the community to know when individual assistance is required and make sure that it is delivered rapidly. Why there was a big delay after Hurricane Sally is unknown. Why there's still cleanup to do over from Hurricane Michael is beyond the pale, and that Mr. Gaetz has allowed the shifting of money out of military construction at Tyndall, for example, to go on an adventure somewhere unrelated to hurricane relief is also showing where his priorities are, and those are not with us. We need to make sure that we've got a FEMA that is funded, on step, connected to science. Science, again, comes into play, and we seem to have a little bit more respect for science when the hurricanes come than when the physical virus comes. But Gaetz doesn't get it on both counts.
Okay, same question for you, Mr. Oram.
Yeah, well, let me begin by telling you what I think FEMA is. It's a useless agency. who saw FEMA in the local area? And I have friends who live in Fairhope, so I was in Fairhope all the way to Pensacola. Haven't seen FEMA yet. Perhaps they were here, but there were a lot of private organizations that were here very quickly. I'm not sure what FEMA spends all its money on. I'm all in favor of good government, not wasteful government. That said, let's look at the issue. I laughed at my conservative friends, one of whom lives on Navarre Beach. He was complaining, where was FEMA? And my response was, well, you claim to be a conservative. Why do you need help from the federal government? And let me say this, he lives on the beach, so he's rich. It's a sandbar. What did he expect if you live on a sandbar that was going to happen? People need to be responsible for what they get themselves into, but we know that they're not going to be. So FEMA needs to be there as a last resort. And we also need a flood insurance program, but people should pay a market price. So we discourage people from building houses on sandbars. Lastly, why was there a delay? Because the president wanted to have a rally here and he was waiting to schedule the rally, and then he was going to announce FEMA individual support. Well, he got COVID, he couldn't have the rally. Immediately afterwards, FEMA approved individual support. Call me suspicious.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oram. Mr. Ayer, would you like to rebut?
Well, was it about $7.5 million in FEMA from this past hurricane? I think that's about right. And look, Bert's right that FEMA is not led properly, and that's where I think we need to focus on the leadership of the federal government, not on the career civil servants and responders that come on with FEMA. Our community comes together so much, across economic lines, across racial lines, and everything. We need leadership in FEMA.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, I'll return this to Sally to ask.
Thank you, Ms. Howard.
You're very welcome to ask Mr. Oram the next question.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, this question's about the security of our vote about elections. Generally, in our county, in Escambia County and in Santa Rosa County, the supervisors of elections get pretty high marks. And the Constitution places election responsibility on the states, not the federal government. Do you see a need for the federal government to step in some way and to maybe there be a constitutional amendment or legislation? Would that be appropriate? Would congressional or presidential elections be more secure if they were controlled by the federal government?
Well, I don't think the federal government should stick their nose into a state responsibility. I agree with you that we in the first district, as throughout the country, have good, honorable civil servants who do a good job with limited resources. And quite frankly, the security of elections, although people claim that there is a problem, hasn't been the issue. It has been politicians who've wanted people to prevent people from voting that make it harder and harder all the time for people to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So I'm not so worried about a problem at the ballot box. Our supervisors of election know what they're doing. If they need assistance, we should be there to help. The larger problem is the cesspool of hatred that has developed in social media throughout this country. That is a greater threat to democracy than Russia trying to interfere with the ballot. They go through the social media and Facebook and promote all types of hateful speech. We need to do something about that. In the meantime, I trust our supervisors of election. If they need assistance, they'll ask for it. And if the federal government can provide it, we should do so.
Thank you. Mr. Ayer, would you like the question repeated?
No, it's fine. The federal government's role here is very clear. It's to protect us from outside threats. And what Russia has done in the 2016, and they're doing it now, did it in 2018, was to interfere in the decision-making process of people's minds so that they would be confused. I spent a career in information warfare, specifically electronic warfare, when you had to separate the real from the fake, the false flags from the lies, and present an authentic picture of what the battlefield is. And that analogy holds in the information space and what we see on our screens, both on the television and in our smaller screens. Look, we need that federal government to be on board with the protection that's required. We need the states' governments to be ethical in what they do, and the indications of problems in the state of Georgia, for example, with lines, right, in the state of Texas, with lines all around where there shouldn't be. We need to have the capacity so that people can vote and keep voting, and vote one time and have it be secure. So the federal government needs standards, but it's the states, and I want to make sure the states continue to be laboratories of good practices in voting. So I want the federal government to monitor, and when there are problems like we've seen in Georgia and other places, here in our district, I've met each of the supervisors of elections in the 5 counties. I have faith and confidence that we'll get it right here.
Mr. Oram.
Ms. Brown, thank you. Just to be clear, the problem is disinformation, and we have a whole political party that's in service to a disinformation propaganda campaign being promoted. It was in 2016 by Vladimir Putin. I know a little about this. You'll learn more about me on my website, makeamericamoreperfect.org, but I was the rule of law advisor at the US Embassy in Ukraine. I worked to reform democracies. I know what Russia is capable of doing. They're not really hacking the ballot box right now. If we keep that off the internet, it'll work. But the disinformation campaign and the cesspool of hatred on social media has to come to an end.
Thank you. Mr. Ayer, this is another question about elections, but a different tack. In 2013, the 5-4 Supreme Court decision, Shelby versus Holder, rendered the pre-clearance system of Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act effectively inoperable. In response, some states instituted an explosion of measures: purges, shutdown of early voting, attacks on absentee ballots, closure of polling places, all supposedly to fight voter fraud. What is your opinion of what's now called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would reinstitute pre-clearance? It has passed the House, but it is stalled in the Senate.
Well, I'm for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act because it is addressing the problems that we see plainly before us. And I'd like also, this continues along the same lines as the last question. Let me just say that Matt Gaetz is known to have said that democracy is not sacred. He looks at the Constitution as an opportunity to be seized, not as a framework in which our values and and the people's will should be done. So there is coercion going on with Matt Gaetz being part of the noise and the disinformation that is part of the Republican leadership. There are good Republicans out there. There are good Republican Party activists that are out there, but it's the leadership who has turned them astray and has coerced us all to not trust each other into the division. I want to work for unity, and that's part of voting. The confidence that we have and the good faith we have in our neighbors and our communities to have honest voting is what we need in our country. We need to work for good faith and mutual respect of differing opinions. And that's what my campaign is all about. Good faith in finding out the facts of voter suppression or voter fraud, and mutual respect of each other as we look transparently at the facts.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, would you like me to repeat the question?
No.
Kind of a long question.
The John Lewis Act. Let me say this. Democratic elections serve a purpose, and that is to give legitimacy to government. This is what we tried to teach our friends in Ukraine and Belarus and Moldova. The importance of elections, free and fair elections. So anything that will promote free and fair elections, I'm in favor of. I don't know John Lewis, but I'm going to presume that I would agree with much of what's in the act. But what we have right now in this country is we have a party that's trying to advance minority rule in every possible way. And the government will lose its legitimacy if we continue with these various efforts to stop everybody from voting. We need a free and fair election. And so I would promote free and fair elections, and I would be opposed to anything. And I'm not at all surprised that Matt Gaetz said that, and he's not here today to defend it. I mean, look what he said about Trump. He's a sycophant. We need people in Washington, D.C. that are intelligent and determined and will refuse to give up their principles for party loyalty. I'm that candidate.
Okay. Any rebuttal, Mr. Ayer?
Well, I just want to say that the John Lewis Act is foundational. You know, he walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and got beat up for the right to vote. It is so critically important. And Reverend H.K. Matthews, a local civil rights icon, also walked across that bridge and was beaten up. He had the courage in his day to organize protests, and we are so grateful for diverse, the ability for all people to dine on South Palafox Street because of H.K. Matthews. And he's looked at us and he says, yes, we need this kind of legislation. And frankly, he endorses me, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Cheryl, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, thank you. This question will be, the first question will be directed to Mr. Oram. The Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus FEC allows corporations and unions to spend unlimited amounts of money on campaign funding without having to disclose the source of that funding. What are your views on restoring transparency and accountability to campaign funding by requiring corporations and unions to disclose the source of these funds?
I'm in favor of the Constitution and the First Amendment, but there are limits and there need to be checks and balances on every right that you find in the Constitution. I disagree with their decision because we know from experience, and there's a great saying that those who forget history were doomed to repeat it, that money corrupts politics. That is why you have a little league of politicians that come up through local and then state government. Matt Gaetz is a perfect example. And he's collected how much this term for this election? $3 million. But the man doesn't have any principles and can't even appear and answer a few questions because he's hiding behind his money. So we need to put an end to that. But in the end, though, let's remember this. So if people want to spend money, then it should be disclosed. And people should remember, you get the best government you buy. Or sometimes there's somebody who will come along and spend very little money, but make a determined effort to try to educate you. I do so for my children, my future grandchildren. I do so because I'm a man of principle. Disclose the money, and let's go look for Gaetz and figure out what he's spending $3 million on, because apparently he can't even show up here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oram. Would you like for me to repeat the question for you, Mr. Ayer?
It's okay, Cheryl, thank you. Look, the Citizens United, it was an awful decision of the United States Supreme Court that must be addressed by the Congress and potentially, probably, from what I can understand, by a constitutional amendment to ensure that people are enfranchised, not corporations being enfranchised. People with the rights to government, not groups of corporations whose interest is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is profit. And that's what we need to guard against. I am contrasting with Mr. Gaetz in the way that he has been funded. If you look at his repeat career politician career in the state legislature, where he was the #1 guy for special interest groups to get legislation in there that has made us less safe as a society. And the same thing is happening right here in Congress. Now, he's claimed to stop taking corporate PAC money, but guess what? he is benefiting from it right now. And if you look very closely at what explains his single vote against the human trafficking bill, he was 418 to 1. And if you look at the money trail behind that one, you will see that he's accepted money from strip clubs in Miami. And these types of things, these connecting the dots, are causal factors, and it destroys us, and it doesn't allow us to have our value in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, would you like to have the opportunity for rebuttal?
Yes, $3 million, where does he get it? You say, Mr. Ayer, that he got it from strip joints. You know, we have this conspiracy group called QAnon that thinks that our politicians are corrupt. Well, here's Matt Gaetz. He's palling around with guys, and I've made a point of this on my website, makeamericamoreperfect.org. The tax collector in the Tallahassee area who was arrested for crimes against children he was using his office. There's a lot more that could be said, but where is he? He's hiding behind his money. We need to make that known, and then you have a choice.
Okay, next question for you, Mr. Oram. What federal measures can help to ease racial tensions in American cities? Should the U.S. military or Homeland Security be policing our cities? Please explain.
Absolutely not. The federal government shouldn't be sending brown shirts in to agitate and worse yet, promote violence. So I'm opposed to Trump sending his brown shirts in to do this. This is what's wrong in the country right now. There's too much hate. But what needs to be done to address racial justice? Trump likes to talk about law and order. Well, all dictators like to talk about law and order. But the real thing we need to focus on is law and justice. Justice for all. That's what we say in the Pledge of Allegiance. And we're not going to have justice until we can acknowledge our past. So I'm in favor of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'm not just making this up now. Several years back, I wrote several times in the Pensacola News Journal about these issues. One of them was about the monuments. That was the only one that they posted online. You can go to my website and read what I wrote. But I also proposed several others, like when Lumen May got pulled over by the cop who ran his license plate wrong. I understand why some people are tired of being harassed by the police. I have no problem with good policing, but we need law and justice for all, and I'm in favor that it starts with a Reconciliation Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Oram. Mr. Ayer, do you need for me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. What federal measures can help to ease racial tensions in American cities? Should the U.S. military or Homeland Security be policing our cities? Please explain.
Okay, let me start with the second part of that question, the federal government's role, and then move into the underlying issue of what's wrong in our society. I happen to have been part of the military when dealing with the legal idea of posse comitatus, the idea of restriction of military going into in our society. Uniformed military, ununiformed military do not have any role of enforcing law enforcement in the United States. And what we've seen is an erosion of that and a clear intent by Mr. Gaetz and other party leaders to promote that. It can't happen. General Milley made a mistake of even going into that realm for a political demonstration that occurred during a protest and some violent protest areas that was being dealt with. Look, the federal government needs to establish law, order, and justice. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3 in order. But the core issue here, are that Black lives do matter. We must face the reality of of people of color not having the same sense of security, because it's not real security when young Black men and women are being profiled and pulled over and jailed and sent into the adult prison system a lot more than white and non-people of color. That must stop. The federal government has a role in that as well.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, would you like to rebut?
I agree. We need to end the disparity in treatment of people. They should all be entitled to law and justice. Violence is the antithesis of democracy and our constitutional rule of law. I'm all in favor of peaceful protest, and I condemn what President Trump did when he wanted to walk across the square in Washington, D.C., using tear gas and rubber bullets and helicopters on peaceful protesters so he could hold up a Bible. I'm surprised it didn't burn his hand. The man is a con man. Don't vote for hate.
Okay. I'm going to turn the questioning back over to you now, Sally.
I think Mr. Ayer wanted to rebut.
Just very briefly to say
Okay.
that Matt Gaetz's role in not recognizing Black Lives Matter is legendary, and it's disgusting. And he is an embarrassment to us all. He's more than that. He's dangerous in his rhetoric, in his associations, and his future outlook. So we've got to stop it and make sure that our laws are addressing real problems, not make-believe problems. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Oram, the next question's for you first. What should
Is
be?
it my turn or is it Mr. Ayers? I can't remember.
I think it's yours.
Go ahead, shoot.
Okay. I think we're doing this right. Am I right, Cheryl?
That's according to my notes. Mr. Oram is next.
I thought so. Okay. What should be components of a long-term economic plan to fund Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and unemployment benefits? Long-term economic plan.
Well, that is one of my long-term priorities, is to protect Social Security. Many people rely on Social Security in their retirement years. It has reduced poverty among seniors substantially, and I'm opposed to any effort at all to change Social Security. So first thing we need to do is that we need to protect it, and we need to make sure that we need to return it to a pay-as-you-go. We should remove the cap on income so that all income is taxed for Social Security purposes in the future. And it's just a very important program. So I don't know what else to say. It is one of my long-term priorities, is to protect Social Security. Now, a separate issue is Medicaid and Medicare. We should keep Medicare in place because it's a very successful government single-payer program for healthcare for seniors. And I'm all in favor of fixing the Obamacare Act, by the way, which is the Republican plan. If you've ever wondered why the Republicans can't come up with another plan, it's because Obamacare is their plan. That's what the Heritage Foundation first proposed. And if the Republicans continue to oppose it, then I'm in favor of single payer.
Mr. Ayer, would you like the question repeated?
Yes, please.
Okay. What should be components of a long-term economic plan to fund Medicare, Social Security, unemployment benefits, and Medicaid?
You know, this is an opportunity to reflect that people who live financially privileged and risk-free lives do find it difficult to understand the integrity and sacrifice required of government and of all of us. So when we as a society stop caring about dignity in old age, we have problems. And that's what's happened when leadership like Mr. Gaetz doesn't value Social Security, or doesn't value the Social Security Act, or doesn't value the Medicare. He voted, what? He voted to cut billions out of the Medicare and Medicaid. That is nonsensical when you don't have a plan. You're on your own, buddy. That is not sufficient for the dignity of our country to live up to the values that we all know and cherish. Look, I want to make sure that the long-term plan includes raising the cap on contributions into the Social Security system so that that system is solvent going forward. So people in their 30s can recognize that, hey, I'm going to have a Social Security when I retire, and I can participate in the economy, take risks in my business and risks in my professional development, and prosper knowing that I'm not going to be thrown out on the street and in the gutter. And the same can be said for the medical situation when you have the Medicare and Medicaid. Those need to be fully funded, and we should have that here in Florida. Now, I'll just end by saying that the 2017 tax cut has not allowed us to grow the economy to fund what we need to fund in terms of retirement security.
Thank you. Mr. Orm, rebuttal.
Yeah, briefly again, Social Security is the foundation of economic security for many Americans, including seniors. I would keep it as a separate self-funded program, eliminate the cap, and return it to pay as you go. Pre-funding is a big fraud. The federal government's been using it to offset spending. If you think that the Republicans want to protect Social Security, look at what Donald Trump has done by waiving the tax. If he gets reelected, he says he will forgive it forever. It'll create a huge hole in Social Security. Don't believe Trump, he's a con man.
Another rebuttal.
Let me just build on what was just said with the waiving of the payroll tax. That's, you know, I spent a career in the Navy, and that's kind of like a payday lender going after sailors. Hey, save your money. It's going to come back, and you need to spend it. So that payday tax is a cheap way of cheap money, adding risk to real families dealing with real crises and real economic crises. Shouldn't have happened.
Okay. The next question goes to Mr. Ayer. And it's along the same lines. Too many Americans cannot afford the cost of health care and prescription drugs. What solutions do you support to correct Americans' healthcare system so that everyone's healthcare needs are met?
When people come around to back to their homes from their offices and their schools, and with children or without children, and try to make ends meet, and you're faced with going to the doctor or paying rent, those are awful decisions to have to make, and they're happening too many times around our country, and it's getting worse. The Affordable Care Act is something we must preserve and improve, and so my approach to the healthcare is to bolster and make sure that there's a coverage for pre-existing conditions, and that we talk about it before we strip away the ACA, like Mr. Gates is supporting now, to have it be ruled unconstitutional and start from scratch without any plan to replace it. He's voted against against funding the Medicare, Medicaid that we need to make sure that we have health security in our country for everyone. So he's just not serious about healthcare. He thinks it's kind of you're on your own kind of thing. And again, you go back to follow that money, and you follow that money and you see that if you're living wealthy and risk-free lives, you're not going to care. And he doesn't care about those who are not able to go see the doctor and in the hospital without financial ruin.
Mr. Orm, would you like the question repeated?
Please.
Okay. Too many Americans cannot afford the cost of health care and prescription drugs. What specific solutions do you support to correct America's healthcare system so everyone's healthcare needs are met?
Well, I support the Republican healthcare plan. Okay, and a mainstay for decades of the Republican healthcare plan has been to support an integration of taxes and spending to discourage underinsurance, public insurance, or charity rather than private insurance, and to make sure everyone has private insurance, regardless of how it's obtained, whether it's obtained at work, in the marketplace, or in an exchange. Does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because it's Obamacare. It's been a big fraud that they're opposed to their own plan. And they've explained why they're unable to come up with another plan, because it is their plan. We have three options. Well, we have four. We have the current system, which is broken. The government pays for half of all healthcare costs. We could have the private plan that Republicans supported until Obama passed it. And now that it's called Obamacare, they don't care. We could have single payer, or we could have a government run insurance or healthcare system. Now, I've been the beneficiary of that, the latter, my whole life. I was in the Navy. My father was in the Navy. I was a Navy spouse for 20 years. I'm covered by the government program, but I care about people who are not covered. Remember, Trump is a con man. When he promises he'll protect pre-existing conditions, you can't do it unless everybody has health insurance, and everybody can't have health insurance unless those who can't afford it get help. That's Obamacare. It's got 3 parts.
Thank you. Sorry, Cheryl.
Okay, and I think Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ayer. I apologize.
It's okay. I just want to add that specifically, I want to make sure that healthcare is not a privilege for the wealthy only. That everybody is afforded an American standard of healthcare, and again, that's outlined right now in the ACA. So that's there, and I want to make sure there's a public option so that people have a choice to buy into a public option that's means tested, so we can get that and deliver that American standard. That's not mean to take away anything from what exists, but to add a public option. Thank you.
Another rebuttal.
As I said, you have 3 options. I'm in favor of Obamacare, but if they cannot support their own plan after a year, I would agree to eliminate Obamacare and go to single payer, which is what Medicare does. It's a program that works very well, as most seniors would agree.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl.
1 year, that's all.
Okay. Sally and Cheryl, let me break in. We've gone about an hour now, and there are just a few questions from the audience. How many questions do you have left on your list? Are we almost at the end?
We have several. I think you should go to audience questions. Don't you, Cheryl?
Yes, I
If
would
Bill's
agree.
agreeable, I'm all in favor of extending it. This is an opportunity for people to
Okay.
talk to the candidates who show up.
Right.
Bill, if you're agreeable, let's continue to answer questions. What are they going to do? Watch Trump tonight?
Okay. Well, and just one announcement that I failed to make at the beginning, and I apologize, is that Mr. Gates and his staff were contacted several times and they never responded. And so that's why Mr. Gates did not appear tonight. It wasn't because he wasn't invited. He was, but we were never able to make contact with him. Here's a question from someone in the audience that about COVID-19. Their question is, going forward with COVID-19, how can the candidates help and push for fact and science-based mitigation practices? For example, educating the public, especially in our district. So I think, Mr. Ayer, that question is to you first.
Okay, great. So thank you. Thank you for that question. Look, the virus is an attack on all of us. It's a global attack, and it's on our country. That's our focus, our country. And at the individual level, that's part of it as well. You know, we need the logistics that are present in warfare. We need to make sure that we fight an external threat like this virus that is now an internal threat as we would warfare. So what the fundamental mistakes were at the beginning persist today by not putting the generals out in front. And the generals in this case would be the public health professionals and scientists. Let them guide what we do to, as I said earlier in this program, to make sure that safety is integral to whatever we do in life. We got to get on with our lives in a safe manner. And what we've witnessed so far with Mr. Gates's concurrence and his support is unsafe practices and bravado where it's not only inappropriate, it is dangerous, and the consequences couldn't be worse. You know, who among us does not have friends who are afflicted by it? Maybe we don't have friends who have perished from it. I have friends that have family who have 3 people have died, and I know of many others. But I'm in the business of knowing people and getting out and talking to them. But guess what? The suffering that occurs with the COVID in your body is a long-term effect, and we've got to stop it, and we've got to tackle it seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Oram, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
Please.
Going forward with COVID-19, how can the candidates help and push for fact and science-based mitigation practices? For example, educating the public, especially in our district.
Well, on the last point, speak out against all the lies and the distortions and the delusions that are making their round. I do it all the time. If you go to my Facebook page, I didn't talk much about politics until the pandemic broke out. And it was clear that this was another example of the failure of Washington, D.C. How many do we have to have? Iraq, the 2008 economic crash, the oil spill Phil reminded us about. It happens over and over and over. And this is another failure. The experts have told us how to fix this back in April. You need rapid, regular, wide-scale testing. How does Trump stay safe? He has regular, rapid testing. It's the key to eliminating the pandemic. This is Trump's program, which protects him in the White House. Testing, isolation, treatment, tracing. Well, he doesn't go for the tracing part, except when somebody tests positive, they make sure he doesn't get to the president. But right now, we're the laughing stock of the world. Our death rate is substantially higher than any others. The Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand just made a big joke that a COVID denier, he said he obviously got educated in America. That is a shame that we've become the laughing stock of the country. I will speak out against it. As you've noticed, you can't stop me from speaking. I'm a lawyer, nothing is brief, but that's what I would do.
Okay, thank you. I will take one more audience question, and then I think the moderators have one last question they would like to ask. This is on a topic I don't think we touched on too much, so I'll choose this one to ask. What, and this goes to Mr. Oram first, what can you do to truly acquire and maintain equal educational curriculum, tools, etc., for our district?
Well, public education is a state government function. So we have to understand that. You're electing me to the office for a federal office, I hope. We have to be realistic. The federal government can't do everything and continue to spend substantially more money than it brings in. But it can help the states where the states say they need assistance. So I'm in favor of that, and I'm in favor of assisting poor counties where education is basically done at the county level, assisting poorer counties so that everybody gets a equal opportunity for a good education. And we need to emphasize that to our children because some of them don't understand. They're young. That's what children are. They're young and irresponsible sometimes. We need to emphasize the point that education is their future. And then we need to help them later if they've made the mistake and failed to get an education. So I'm all in favor of assisting public education, helping people go to college or learn a trade. There's good money to be made in many trades. Not everybody needs to be a history major at a college. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Okay, thank you. Same question to Mr. Ayer. Do you need it repeated?
Fine. Now let's think about what's going on in schools right now. What's going on in the schools right now is, again, this COVID cloud is over everything. Gates has not protected us. He has not even, he's shown that he is happy to send our children into, and our teachers and our public school workers into dangerous situations without proper safety precautions, and that's got to stop. Schooling must go on, but Gates's leadership has got to stop. The federal government us as a society, we as a society have a public interest in public education. It's one of the great levelers we have in making real America's promise of equal opportunity. So we need to make sure that the federal government does its role that is already established when states need help to make sure that there is funding going into underprivileged schools. That needs to be there. But more than money, and what is so missing in the state of Florida is leadership in education. Right now, we have the 41st, ranked 41st as a state in spending per pupil. Our teachers are not being paid sufficiently. And yet we have the, fourth largest or very high GDP. We're not spending it on the things that matter for our future, like education. That's one of the main problems with our district that I want to help to fix. It's primarily an issue for Tallahassee, but the federal government needs to do its part by setting a tone for respect for teachers and public education.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ayer. Sally, I'm sorry, did you have rebuttal, Mr. Oram?
I just want to say bravo, respect for teachers, and for the hardworking parents that tell their children to get a good education.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it back to you, Sally.
Okay, we have one last question, and it's pretty general, but what specific steps should Congress take to help unify rather than further divide our nation during this very partisan period in our history? And I don't know who goes first.
Mr. Ayer does.
Mr. Ayer.
Specific steps to unify us would be, our nation is hurting, and the role that elected leaders play is important and it's pivotal to how we come together. It's not a time for party politics, and it's more about focusing on practical issues and real people issues, not dividing us with race, not dividing us with income, and not setting up more haves and have-nots. No, it's moving us together forward in every aspect of life. Our opponent's record in rhetoric is not helpful. He has turned us against science. He's proliferated conspiracy theories of QAnon and InfoWars and all other kinds of nonsense, and it is nonsense. So we need to make sure that we lead with integrity, and I plan to do so, as I've done for my career, to tell the truth, to be open, to listen, and to move forward from the left and from the right and from the center. We need to move forward to work on and focus on our community. Now, after the Parkland shooting, there were two vigils held. One vigil was downtown with gun violence activists. Another vigil was held at a church with the great and the good, the elected leaders, the appointed police chiefs. They both said the same thing. They both said, this shall not happen again. We're going to stop it. We both cried. But those groups are not talking to each other in the public space. The kind of leadership that I would demonstrate is what I did to bring them together at a town hall focused on gun violence. And I don't think that's happened before, where these groups are coming together and talk as a community.
Thank you. Mr. Oram.
My theme has been, and I'm inspired to say, and I will say it again until I die, make America more perfect, don't vote hate. You're going to hear another slogan, but our future is not behind us, as I've said. I believe in the Constitution. Violence is the antithesis of the Constitution and rule of law. I believe this with my soul. And if you believe it like I do, we can do anything. I will dare to lead. That is a slogan at the Naval Academy where I went to school. And I'm proud to repeat it. I will dare to lead, to build consensus and alliance, to make America more perfect. I don't back down when people say things that are wrong. I hosted a program at WEBY for many years. Some people might remember it, few do. Once a week, I tried to explain to people how we can solve our problems. If we work together, we are better together, we can solve any problem. So I want you to remember, don't vote hate. But I also want you to remember one more thing I won't have time to talk about much, but it's at my website. Rememberlori.org. This explains everything that's wrong with government and politics now. Shame on Matt Gaetz for failing to defend Lori Klausutis. As I said, her and her family and friends live in Niceville, where he lives. Yet when Trump defamed this woman who was devoted to her husband, well, go to my website, rememberlori.org, and it will tell you what you need to do. Nothing will change if we remain silent.
Okay. Mary Louise, may I call now for the final statement?
Absolutely. Thanks, Cheryl.
Okay, well, at this time, we've concluded all of the questioning for this evening. We'd like to thank you both for being here with us tonight. And at this time, each of you will have 1 minute to give your closing statements. And I believe, Mr. Oram, you were last responding to the prior question, so you will be first.
I'm inspired to say, makeamericamoreperfect.org, don'tvotehate.org. Politicians today are too lazy to lead. They instead pander to fear, anger, and hatred all the time. You know, the people of my generation were fortunate. We inherited a good country from our parents and grandparents. Not perfect. We have problems, but we've always been able to solve those problems through dialogue and debate. Now we have politicians, partisan gridlock in Washington, D.C. Politicians blame each other instead of taking responsibility to solve problems. They criticize and vilify those they don't agree, and instead of building consensus and alliance for change. We can do better together. I will dare to lead to build consensus to make America more perfect. MakeAmericaMorePerfect.org, don'tvotehate.org, therealmaverick.org, rememberlori.org. You'll find my website. You'll learn more about me. But remember, votehope.nothate.org. Get out there and vote. Let's send a message.
Thank you, Mr. Oram. Mr. Ayer.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and Links Incorporated for hosting this event and conducting a very well-run event. And I join you in dismay that Mr. Gaetz can't return phone calls. And let me just be clear that we have been challenging him for a debate for some time. And the way we were able to get to him was through the airwaves of a popular radio station where he often visits, and it was asked. And we heard him say that he'd be happy to debate and then talk something about a public radio station, not a debate. So what is he doing? He's not just disrespecting this audience, he's just disrespecting all of us and the constituents. A decent congressman wouldn't do that. So I'm calling on us right now, owners of self-government, to stand tall and lead America's revival. We can elect people based on their record of service and leadership. We can elect leaders with vision beyond their personal ambition and headline news. We are on the threshold of a new day where truth, honesty, morality, and a commitment to American ideals matter.
Okay, and Mr. Oram for the final comments.
Just briefly, Phil, let's do this again. Let's give the people of the district of First District of Florida the opportunity to hear what we have to say. Let's go and search out Matt Gaetz. Maybe he choked on that gas mask. He thought COVID was all a big joke. Let's go find him. Let's continue the discussion and debate. Thank you, ladies, for hosting us. Thank you, Phil, for being here. That's all I have to say. Well, not all I have to say. I'm a lawyer. But.
Thank you. We'll turn it back over to you now, Mary Louise, unless Dr. Brown has something else that she'd like to add.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, gentlemen. We really appreciate your time and your participation. Thanks to the timekeepers. Thank you to the moderators. Thank you to our director, Vivian Faircloth. And again, the recording of this will be posted on Facebook later this evening and on YouTube some point tomorrow, as soon as I get time to do it. So thanks again, and I will go ahead and end the meeting for everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.